All right, so season 2 recap. But I suppose before we actually start recapping the season, we should provide a welcome for any kind of new listeners or viewers in this case, because for the first time we are recording not just the audio version of Corrections Community, but also the video version.
Yeah, it's actually really exciting. It's our first time in studio, Corrections Community Studio 2.0, and we are no longer in a garage, right? We're no longer in my living room.
We've moved on up slightly.
We've moved up.
Studio 2.0, yeah. But so for those who don't know us, I mean, the best way to really, learn more about us is to go back and find any one of our episodes from the past 2 seasons. You can find us on Instagram at Corrections Community. We have some bios there. We have a couple posts there around meeting the host. And then we also have on our website, correctionscommunity.com. You can also go to our Meet the Host page there as well to get a quick little blurb on who we are.
Yeah, but real quick, so I am Marcus Ford. Been doing this podcast now for a little over about a year. And we're just excited to be here with you, happy to be here with all of you listening to us on Corrections Community.
Yeah, and this is something that was started by 2 former probation officers here in the state of Oregon. I say former, not like I'm out of the field. I just took another opportunity to become a Community Corrections Supervisor. So I'm still working in the field of corrections, but Marcus, you left, right?
Yeah, I am currently working in equity and inclusion and diversity, which is really exciting for me. It's something I'm very passionate about. And it was one of the very few things that could draw me away from community corrections, because I do actually love the field of community corrections.
Right. So, it's that I guess, concern and passion for the field and the advancement of it, to help people. That's what had kind of sparked this project and our continuation of it and the evolution of it over time, right? So here we are at the end of season 2. We've done 10 episodes. I guess, what is it, like 19 total now? And we always like to cap off these seasons by kind of reviewing each episode, each guest that we've had on, or the topics that we discussed. So this is kind of our opportunity to do that.
Yeah, and not by any means a big review. This will be probably a little shorter than our normal episodes. We don't want to speak for our guests by any means, and we allow them to speak for themselves. Yeah. That's why we have those episodes. So we encourage you to go back and listen to those episodes if you haven't heard them already.
So the kind of season premiere we did was James Demery, who is I'll say former mentor. He's still in the business of peer mentoring. Very passionate about that because, and he described his personal experience, his personal connection to that. But he's kind of moved into more of a managerial role at this point. But what really stood out to me is just the storytelling, right? Like the lived experience he was able to bring, and that had been something that was missing from our entire first season. We want to invite people on that work within the field, but I think it's important that we also provide the opportunity and the space for people touched by the folks in this field as well, right? Like the folks that have been on supervision, again, that have that lived experience and can bring those stories in here that you really understand the kind of the significance of what we do and how we do it when you hear someone that's been on the other side.
Yeah, we were honored to have James join us, and starting off the season with that, we had some mixed emotions from folks.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, it was someone had kind of shared a response to listening to that episode that we didn't expect.
Yeah. One of our good friends said he felt when he was listening to that he was powerless as a PO because he needed the client needed to decide for themselves when to change, and we'll touch on this a little bit later. But it's I wanted to highlight that so that when we get to a later episode, as we're going through this recap, we can reflect on that moment.
That's right, because James was sharing how he had been on supervision for an extended period of time. He hadn't had a lot of success. He'd had a lot of different probation officers that he'd worked with, and yeah, that's right. And the response that this listener had was, man, it really seemed like, these, as a PO, I'm kind of powerless. It's really up to the client, the person on supervision, to decide when they want to change, and then they go forth and do it. So what can I do? And that's it's important to kind of to surface that and discuss that a little bit more. But yeah, I agree. There's going to be a connection to that in our 10th episode where we talk about power. And so let's put a button on that for now. So our second episode was with Jeff Hanson. He was our guest from Oregon DOC, and he's a pretty well known figure, at least locally, again here in Oregon. And he's known because he's such a big player when it comes to training and the advancement of evidence-based practices. So if you've been in the field here in Oregon for the past 10 years, you have received some form of training from Jeff Hanson.
You definitely know Jeff Hanson, and it was really great to get his perspective on things because he talked about the history of change, not only within our organizations in the state of Oregon, but also, a lot of the change that happened nationally, and the change which impacted me the most, the change that happened within himself, right? As he was growing throughout all this change process, he really reflected on that, and that was powerful for me.
And that's why I love doing this and having these interviews and listening to these people's stories, because Jeff is more than a trainer. He's more than a historian, right? He got to share a bit of his whole self, which is another topic that we also discussed in episode 5, but I'm jumping around a bit here. But that's, I think, really an underlying goal of every interview that we do is it's more than just the topic or the subject matter. These people are, they bring a ton of knowledge and experience to the table, but we really like to kind of, find the story about the person. The human interest there is really important, and Jeff did a great job with that one.
Yeah, we always want to make sure that we're humanizing not just the folks that we're working with, but the folks that are doing the work,
right.
Which leads us into our episode 3, right? We interviewed Katie Gotch, who, if you work in Oregon and you work in any part of the field of sex crimes, you have interacted with her in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, Katie is just a fantastic subject matter expert around sexual offending and or working with folks who've been convicted of a sex crime, right? And it's a topic that can be very uncomfortable for a lot of reasons. But I think we were able to, again, kind of your point earlier, to really kind of humanize this issue, view it as I'm trying to think of that, kind of the public health lens that she brought, right? And again, not to kind of diminish the significance or the harm that is produced when a sex crime occurs, but really the way we titled that episode was really trying to prevent anything like that happening again as much as possible, right? Using best practices, using the best tools available to prevent any further harm from occurring. And Katie did an excellent job of kind of framing that conversation or that issue, and it was an important one to have. Yeah. So our fourth episode was with Dr. Kara Thompson, and I can call her Dr. Kara Thompson. I know she's a doctor because we read her dissertation.
Yep, all, I believe, 96 pages.
Well, I mean, and I may have skimmed some of those at the end, but I did read the vast majority of it. And
yes.
No, she's fantastic. She went to school at University of Cincinnati, which has been in their
Corrections Institute.
Thank you. Has had a really significant effect on corrections here in Oregon and other states as well.
And one thing that's so significant about her is she's not just an academic, right? She is this brilliant academic, but she's also, been in the field. Like she gets her boots on the ground and works with POs and has worked in our organizations in Oregon and in across the country and sees it firsthand.
Yeah, that was what stood out to me during that conversation, right? She didn't come at it from this 1,000-foot view that was kind of out of touch or disconnected from what we do here on the ground. She has worked shoulder to shoulder with a lot of probation officers, and that showed when she was describing her surprise early on at hey, wow, this is what they do every day. This is what their workload looks like, and how do we make room for the additional things that we're asking folks to do as we generate change in the field. So I really appreciated her perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then our next episode, this was one of my favorites because we got to talk about ourselves. And, I'm a little bit of a narcissist and I'm okay with admitting that.
Well, we call it origin stories. I know, I'm sorry. I know you wanted to do a photo shoot where we had, we're taking we had the Superman
the S on the chest.
Before us, like a superhero kind of thing. That got vetoed. But, it was a good conversation because part of it was just hey, we want to share who we are, but it really kind of evolved into this broader conversation about bringing our whole selves to work And the realization that I had literally live as we're recording that, like, you know what, I'm not doing a good job of this. And my commitment since then to really explore this topic of the whole self with my staff, and encourage others, right, to be curious, to understand that, you know, we are more than who we bring to the office, and also considering this as it pertains to our clients as well. You know, we are oftentimes extremely focused, hyper focused on, understandably at times, the task at hand, right? Is this person in compliance, or meaning not just with their conditions, but perhaps their goal or their case plan. And sometimes we maybe don't take that additional time to explore that whole person, other things that are factors in that person's life.
Yeah, and another thing that I really love about this type of episode is this is based on some direct feedback we got in season 1, where one of our listeners was saying, like, I love the content, I love what you're bringing, but I need to know more about y'all. And because y'all are the voice here, y'all are kind of the face of this content you're bringing in, and we need to know more about you so that we can connect a little bit more. And so that's part of the reason why we did that episode.
Yeah. And it makes sense too. It's like, why would we care what you have to say? I don't know who you are. So, we definitely want to take advantage of those opportunities to share a little bit more of ourselves.
Yeah. And just a reminder that we're listening, right?
Yeah.
If you got something to shout out to us and let us know, give us feedback, or
drop a comment.
Yeah, drop a comment on our Instagram.
Mm-hmm. All right. So our 6th episode this season was with Pat Schreiner. He's a former community justice manager, and he's one of those folks that I would expand this beyond Oregon. He's just a well-known figure. He's retired now, but he's been in the field for a long, long time, worked at a lot of different agencies, and brought that different perspective that's gained over time. And so, and you were saying there was kind of what was that Kevin Bacon game that we could play with?
The 6 degrees of separation.
Yeah, that's right. Like, I don't care who you are or where you work. If you're in the field, within six different relationships, you're going to be connected to Pat Schreiner. Yep. You may not know it, but you will.
You are
connected. Yeah. So, and he's also someone that, when I think about this time, this year of COVID, so to speak, and how many limits that this pandemic has imposed on us, I just really appreciate the ability for us to establish a connection with someone like Pat. He's been a great friend of the show. We've never actually got to sit down with him in person. I mean, I think we maybe cut across paths at some point in
I got to.
Yeah, but we've had so many meetings, so many kind of coffee meetings over virtual meetings over Zoom and whatnot. And hopefully someday soon we'll be able to actually connect with him in person. But it's a testament to our ability to continue to build relationships in spite of all the limitations that this pandemic has created.
Yeah. He's definitely, a mentor to both of us, I feel. Yeah. Our next episode after this was episode 7. This was with Matt Leach, and he, if you know Matt, he is a wizard when it comes to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But again, talking about the whole self, he's so much more than that.
Well, he's just a great coach. He happens to coach jiu-jitsu amongst other things, but he's just you just use the word mentor to describe Pat. And Matt is one of those folks as well. I think it's just go back and listen to this episode, right? But he's one of those folks where find yourself a Matt Leach. They're out there, and if you can kind of get into someone's orbit like that, invite them to coffee, sit down with them, be curious. Folks like Matt, they're always looking for someone to help, to coach, to mentor, to guide. They give it away for free. It's there. Find yourself a coach. Find yourself a Matt Leach.
He has fully embraced the coaching mindset. Like,
sure.
He walks through life as a coach. And as part of that, he is a lifelong learner. He never stops learning, which is incredible
and inspiring to me personally. Jeff Wood. This was he's an undersheriff, and so now we're getting into that topic of power, right? This concept of power and who and what he represents. But the thing that stood out to me most for some kind of a high-ranking official like Jeff, what he said about the badge and what that represents really was it was really inspiring to me. and I'm gonna butcher what his quote is. Again, like go back and listen to the episode because I really liked it. But he talked about what the badge represents, which for some folks it may represent power, right? Just the badge in of itself, that imagery, right? He just really described it as a piece of metal. It's the badge itself is nothing unless you have the trust of the community that you're serving and sworn to protect, right? That's that critical piece. Without that trust and that community engagement to build that trust and sustain that trust, it's meaningless.
Yeah, and that's something that we really connected over during that episode because I'm in the field of community engagement now, so I'm extra passionate about that, and to hear somebody in a position like his where he's got such great power to wield, he wields it for the community.
Just incredibly humble.
Yeah.
Not an act. I mean, the guy's he's just really humble in spite of the success he's had over a long career. So we're great to have him on. And then Mark Carrie was our 9th episode. I think we could say he's kind of a nationally recognized figure in the field of corrections. I think most people would recognize him from the Carrie guides, but I think that's another theme here, right? It's more than just that, right? More than just kind of his business, but who he is, the perspective he brings. He's done a lot of consulting, worked with a lot of agencies all across the country. What do you say, 48? There was like 48 states, like two holdouts. One of them's Alaska. Like, what are you doing up there, Alaska? Come on, get on board. No. But yeah, he said something that really, really stood out to me. And I'm going to weave this back to our comment from our listener in the first episode, right? Where they must felt like, what is the word? Like they felt powerless, right? In respect to the client's decision to change. So Mark, he made a statement that he talked about the importance of recognizing who has power and the relationship or the dynamic between an officer and probation officer in this case, or a client, a justice involved individual. And I suppose on paper one might perceive the officer to have all of the authority and the power. And I won't say that there is not. There is certainly a level of authority and power, right? But the way that Mark framed it, he really talked about the client having all the power. He really talked about how they have the power whether or not they decide to come back the next time an appointment is scheduled. They have the power to decide if they're going to follow through on any directives or orders that they maybe have received, right? So kind of an acknowledgement there. And that's a powerful one because when you acknowledge who has the power in that dynamic, you can change your approach or be more mindful of that approach. So going back to our listeners' perspective, and I love the analogy of a coach for so many reasons here when I think about the professional identity of a parole and probation officer. But have you seen that documentary series on the Michael Jordan, the Chicago Bulls? What was it called? The Last Dance. Last Dance, I think it was on Netflix. And so, I'm a sports fan. I'm a basketball fan. So they chronicle what's arguably, I don't want to hear from any Golden State Warriors out there, arguably the greatest team of all time, right? The championship, like 97, 98 Chicago Bulls, right? Led by Michael Jordan. Well, Michael Jordan and quite a few other figures, right? Including the head coach, Phil Jackson, right? So I think we have to state the obvious. The players on that team have the power, right? They're the ones on the court. They're the ones playing defense. They got to put the ball through the hoop. That's the bottom line. And so I suppose one perspective might be, well, what does the coach have to do with any of that, right? I mean, the coach can't. Phil Jackson's not running onto the court and stealing the ball. He's certainly not going to go out there and shoot a corner three. He can't do anything on the court. He can influence the game mid-game. Maybe he can call a timeout, and I suppose that doesn't really, an officer doesn't really have the ability to do that, in the middle of the action. But aside from that, when you think about what an officer can do, and the parallel being the coach here, as far as, how do you build skills? How do you practice certain things? How do you put together a game plan for that person? So when that person goes out and acts and they go out into the world, are their decisions going to be influenced by that relationship, by the teachings, by the direction, by the planning, the strategy that you collaborate, that you work together to build? And so, again, I think it's important to acknowledge the power, the true power, not just the power to say something, to give a directive, but the power to decide what actually happens.
And the power to change.
And the power to change. I think there needs to be acknowledgement, but it doesn't mean that you are powerless as an officer, as a coach, right? If I can continue to borrow that analogy, it absolutely does not mean you're powerless. It just changes the role that you should try to embrace.
Yeah, and I think it helps clarify the role. I mean, a lot of folks struggle with their identity, right, when it comes to their role as a coach or parole officer or probation officer, and I think framing it that way really helps clarify that. Right, I'm just giving you the tools to succeed.
And I think some people have a problem with this particular analogy when they think about, well, what about the accountability piece? What about, absolutely. Yeah, a coach has to, there's rules. Sometimes you don't play someone. Sometimes you kick someone off the team. You suspend them. There's absolutely, you can't, maybe you've been coached before. I'm trying to have you imagine being coached by someone who just never enforced any rules all the time.
No, I've definitely missed multiple games for breaking rules. And,
so I mean, again, we're talking about analogies here. It just helps me kind of frame things in my mind. It helped me as an officer. It helps me as a supervisor. And I just loved how Mark really brought that to surface, this concept of power, right? But there is one thing that I disagreed with upon further reflection. I didn't disagree in the moment. But, Mark said something about how corrections does not have, as an institution, as a field, does not have an identity problem. We have a BHAG problem, or a lack of a BHAG, right? What does that stand for again?
Big, hairy, audacious goal.
That's right. I'm trying to remember where that was coined from, but I love that. But upon further reflection, I might argue that we do, in fact, have an identity problem. In fact, I'm trying to remember. It wasn't that long ago we had asked someone, this idea of an identity or a brand almost, right? If I can kind of borrow that for a moment. What comes to mind when someone, maybe a stakeholder, maybe just a community member, maybe someone on supervision or previously on, what comes to mind when they hear the word community correction, or the term community corrections? We asked someone that.
Yeah, and the response was, I feel like it's at odds with itself. It's an oxymoron. Community corrections.
And that wasn't someone who's has been in the system, but someone who was interested in the field, right, in criminal justice, right. And again, that's just one person. That's not an official survey or anything like that. But I think when that is the response, then and I don't think that person's alone in that response. I think commonly there's a lot of folks who honestly don't know what we do or what our goals are or any of our common practices. In fact, I think there are a lot of misconceptions around that. Granted, there's a lot of diversity across the country. There's a lot of different practices. But in general, when I think about here just locally in Oregon, I think we could do a lot more to improve our overall identity, and maybe adopting a BHAG is a good first step. I don't know.
Yeah. Wow, we spent a lot of time talking about Mark Carrie's podcast there.
Sorry. Well, I think that was kind of our season finale, right? And then I mean, here we are, kind of talking about our recap. This is our 10th episode, but I guess overall, though, looking back now, what was kind of your lessons learned? Kind of things
there's three things I want to talk about as we wrap this season recap up. First, I want to make sure we talk about those lessons learned. That's important. But also want to what were our favorite moments, right? Each of us pick one moment from the season 2 that was a favorite, and then I want to talk about what's next, right? What's coming for community for corrections community.
Okay. Gosh, a favorite moment. I'm trying to think of that. You kind of put me on the spot. Well, okay, you go ahead and start.
All right. So my favorite moment was Jeff Wood's episode. We went down to Salem to record that, and we had just gotten our camera, and we were feeling really good and awesome. Like we had this camera on the tripod. We were walking around filming each other. We were walking in the building, looking cool, opening the door. I go stand on the other side of the door, and you film as I walk in. We just really feeling ourselves, right? Yeah. And all of the footage was just awful.
Yeah, it's trash.
It just came out so bad. We deleted all. It was just not good. But it was fun. It was really fun to just like learn as we're doing.
Yeah.
Right. It was just a fun moment for us.
Yeah. Gosh, I'm trying to pick out, it's probably not, it's those odd little moments, right? It's not in any of the, there's good moments I could pick, and I guess that's what we've just done, right? Is kind of picking these moments within each conversation. But overall, honestly, I would say, maybe we're living it right now. I don't know. I'm trying to be present, right? I feel like this opportunity to do something new and take this dive into kind of this video dimension here, where we're actually trying to show ourselves and what we look like. I've also been thinking about how I assume some feedback we'll get is like, wow, you guys didn't look like how we thought you'd look like. Yeah, but I've kind of enjoyed like adding this dimension, but learning along the way, right? Because the complexity, is multiplied when, it's hard enough just trying to figure out how to make a podcast, let alone, create some video here and edit that, and then, put it up on, YouTube, wherever it's going to be sitting. So
yeah, one of my favorite moments overall of this entire show, talking about what Chris just said, is people not thinking we look like we sound.
Yeah.
During season 1, we had an episode where our age came up, and I made a little jab at Chris that he's older than me, and Chris
a little bit,
correctly snapped back that he has beat me in a foot race.
Yes.
Which he has. It was very close, but he has.
It wasn't close.
Yeah, whatever. It was close.
No, you.
It was close.
Okay. Whatever. I'll give you that. But,
yeah. And my brother listened to that podcast. Thank you for listening, Jimmy. And he was like, "You let that dude beat you in a race?" He was like, "Man, he sounds slow." And I have never, like, every time I look at Chris now, I'm just like, "Man, you sound slow."
Huh? All right. Well,
so I wonder if when my brother eventually sees this, he's gonna think you look slow.
Okay. He can come up here and get some too. If he wants to lace him up.
Lace him up.
Yeah. No, I'll probably blow a hamstring if I try to get out there and do that again. But so it just adds another layer, and I lean into these challenges, right? I think this is kind of it's been fun. It's work. It's a labor of love, but I think just honestly, this moment, like this is great. This is something new, and it's a new challenge, and I dig it.
All right. The next thing I want to talk about is what we've learned between season 1 and season 2. Like moving from season 1, starting in the garage, fans blowing heat, right, to where we are now.
Yeah. I think the big thing is, we were talking earlier about like identity for the field and kind of the feeling that's kind of evoked. I think we've also been thinking about kind of the identity of this show, and how to kind of shape that or present that and communicate that. And so like a big thing has been like stepping into social media a bit, like, which I don't have a lot of experience with, but building our Instagram account, right? It's very, very simple. Check us out on there, by the way. That's just like, it's just one other layer to like get information out, right? Like, hey, we have a new episode available, right? Like we just posted something. It's kind of silly, by the way, that I didn't start with that. This is how I think about things, right? I'm just like, let's just build it and not tell anyone about it. And then somehow people are going to find it, right? That doesn't even make any sense. But
if you have not yet followed us on Instagram, we are at Corrections Community.
Do it.
So give us a follow. We're engaged.
Yeah.
We are actively paying attention to it. So if you've got something to say, holler at us. Another thing that I think that we've learned throughout is we cannot remain in the same place. We cannot stay with the same mindset. We have to continually adapt. We've grown so much from let's talk about X to let's explore this more, right? And just deep diving into different things and learning as we go, right? Adding the video component, adding the studio component, adding, social media, adding graphic design, right? Adding branding, like all these things that we had never done before.
Yeah. And I'll say, and this is kind of related to that, right? That learning, but also the space to learn is, I would not, we would not be able to produce anything resembling this if not for the support of our family, our friends, loved ones. But for me in particular, right? Like, but with my wife, she has been a huge supporter of mine. And again, like, I just would not be able to do any of this stuff without her. And I don't mean just like kind of passive support, like, hey, here, here's the space that you need. I'll give you that space that you need. It's like direct support. I'm like coming to her and be like, hey, how do you post this? How do you design that? How do you think this looks? Hey, can you record this spot on our on our podcast episode? It's everything. So, we've been together for 17 years or something like that, and so she's Jessica, she's my wife, and she's been just a huge support in this.
Yeah, she's incredible. She's helped us out immensely, and her sister as well has helped us in terms of like learning how to do some some social media branding and such.
Side hustle. Yeah. So I mean, what can we pivot to talking about kind of what's next to kind of wrap this up?
Yeah. So. We're, this right now is part of what's next, right? We are, for those of you listening on Spotify or, Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or whatever, you can't see us, but, we are adding a video component. And so this is one of the ways that is one of the things that is coming up next and really excited about is adding this video component and finding more ways to engage with our community.
Yeah. I think of, goals for season 3 in terms of kind of both vertical goals and horizontal goals. So vertical meaning, like kind of going up that hierarchy, going up and trying to have guests that have, more power, I guess you could say, more authority at higher levels of organizations or perhaps kind of be more recognized nationally. Not to say that we want to get too far away from our roots. We don't want to just interview administrators. We want to interview people and include people that do the job every day, that are on the ground level, right? It's really important. Absolutely. But as far as horizontally, so I mean, again, kind of nationally, maybe a little more outside of the state of Oregon, because I want to explore more of that. How are practices different across the country, but also outside of the field? James was an example of that. Where he is related, but I think there's so many stories to be told from folks that aren't sworn officers or formerly sworn officers, right?
Yeah, and you, right? You're next, right? We can use you, right? Give us feedback. Let us know what it is you want us to record, what you want us to talk about, where you want us to deep dive, and where we can improve, right? Mm-hmm. That is something that we are always looking at, right? Like I said, the Instagram at Corrections Community, our website correctionscommunity.com, and our email account correctionscommunitypodcast@gmail.com.
Or, this is going to be on YouTube, so, people can just drop a comment there as well. So we're always just, we're always just trying to get better at this and figure it out. So any guidance or any feedback you can help that puts wind in our sails. It helps us kind of course correct and move forward. So
I assure you, we're just regular folks.
Yeah. I mean, if that's probably abundantly clear by this point, if anyone. But hey, if you're still listening, man, we appreciate it. Like every play, every comment that we get just through the grapevine that we hear, it's uplifting. It empowers Marcus and I to move forward and keep generating content and keep sharing stories on this platform. So, man, any other kind of final thoughts before we wrap this episode?
No, I think that's it. We really touched on everything, and just a heartfelt thank you to all of our guests, all of our listeners, and to our family support.
Yeah. All right. For Marcus Ford, Chris Chandler, this is Corrections Community. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.